pleasure and honor, as always, to bring in our good friend, our dear friend, the voice of the Calgary Flames for so many of us, the Hall of Famer, Peter Maher, joins us this afternoon on Just a Game. Pete, how you holding up?
Holding up pretty good, Rob. Pretty good. Was not a very entertaining game to be watching last night from a fan standpoint of the Flames, but it was puzzling, really, on my my vantage point, and how little this team had desperation for such an important game. And they talk about the fact that some indicated that maybe they were looking ahead to tonight's game against Winnipeg. Well, a veteran team doesn't do that, and this is a veteran team. This Flame squad is the second oldest team in the league. Yeah. The approach to the game should have been top notch last night, even though they were playing the worst team in the league and had another game tonight against the team that they're trying to pass to get into the playoffs. But they just didn't have any jump, any spark, and so many turnovers through the course of the game. And then, of course, they led to the goals that were scored by Chicago to pull off that victory. The Blackhawks came into the game having lost 8 straight. I mean, some people figure they were tanking to get the Connor Bedard, and yet they were able to knock off the Flames in such a critical game. So, another thing that puzzles me here is that Blake Coleman made a comment not that long ago, might have been 2 weeks ago. He was saying, "We've got a good team here. We just don't know how to win." Yeah. I found that puzzling, considering the veteran team that they have. Plus, there's 4 players on that team, including Coleman, that are past Stanley Cup winners. So, it's really puzzling how this team hasn't performed up to the level that I thought they would going into the year.
Well, you're in playoff level. You're in playoff mode because you just gave me 3 different branches to go off of this. So let me start first. I want to pose this back to you. As I said, right off the top, I'm so excited that Afterburner was on last night and the Barn Burner went already today, because I think they handled the emotional, the necessary emotional issues and baggage that the fans have, and calling for heads and all of those sort of things. I wanted to look at this a little bit more rationally. Pete, I just wonder if you can play that chase hockey. And I call it chase hockey because they're chasing a spot. They're chasing a team. In many ways, well, in the last 3 games for sure, they were chasing the game at some point. I just don't know if there's any emotional equity left in these guys. And I will get to the Coleman comment in a second, but it reminds me a little bit of Brent Sutter's first year here with the Flames, that, they were right around a playoff spot at the trade deadline, and then they fell out, and they tried, but they just couldn't get back into it. It's hard when you're chasing, when you put yourself in the position that the Flames put themselves in. It's a hard game. You're thinking about it. It takes its toll. I just wonder if they just didn't have enough emotion left, for the lack of a better term.
It is a valid point, Rob. The thing, though, that I would say with that is that they shouldn't be in this position.
100%. Oh, yeah, for sure. Sure. Yeah.
I mean, if they were, the only good run they had a good run at the beginning of the year when they won 5 of their first 6 games, their best start in franchise history. Yep. And then in the last run up to last night, where they'd won 4, or otherwise they hadn't had any really sustained good runs on the season, and to put themselves into this jeopardy. So it is a valid point that you make, that maybe they've just run out of that steam, if you will, and don't have any left. But you would have thought they would have, if they played half as well last night as they did, they'd have won the game last night.
Sure.
And they've lost 3 games to Chicago this year.
Yeah.
Worst team in the league.
Yeah.
If they, if they don't win all of those, they'd be ahead of Winnipeg today. So it's really puzzling how this year has gone. And to me, and I think I said it the last time I was on the show, if you follow Daryl Sutter's game plan, you'll win. You'll have success. I haven't seen them play Daryl type hockey very often this year.
And okay, so let me bridge this conversation now to the Blake Coleman conversation. And this is just a hypothesis, Pete. It really is, because I haven't been down in the room. I haven't been around the team at all. But at the time of those comments from Blake Coleman, it seems to me that that's when the leaks were coming out about the lack of cohesion and the players not getting along with the coach. And and all of those sort of things. And I just wonder at the time, and I wondered at the time, if those comments from Blake Coleman about not knowing how to win was more about shut up and do your job from a veteran player.
Yeah, I think that was the intent of his comment, although not saying it that way. But
Right.
and they did. They had that players only meeting after that 8-2 loss against Los Angeles, and then they went on the run that 4 straight wins that came to an end last night. So that was a healthy topic for him to bring up among the players, and I'm sure when they had the players only meeting, he was probably even more open about that type of situation and bringing out the fact that we've got to quit this complaining and just go out and play. And it worked for 4 games, and to correspond with that, Winnipeg, who they're playing tonight, they had a similar situation about a week and a half ago, where there was all kinds of talk about their coach, Rick Bowness, having trouble communicating, getting through to the players. Scheifele was one of the main names that was out there. So they had their players only meeting, and since then they've gone on and won a couple of games in a row to get themselves back into the playoff spot. So and Rick Bowness couldn't be any more of a different coach than Daryl Sutter. I mean, Daryl is the guy that he has his outlines for the game, and then he really pushes his players hard to get the maximum out of them, and sometimes that grows a little low. In the case of Rick Bowness, he's a guy that he comes out with his game plans, and then he's constantly patting his players on the back, saying how good they're going or whatever to encourage them positively. Now, he did have a couple of little breakdowns of that losing streak before they went into their current run, but he couldn't be more opposite, and that's really intriguing. And tonight they're going to coach against each other like they did last year in the playoff series when Bowness was coaching with Dallas. I know it was a great series. The Flames managed to pull that one out. So, but yeah, I mean, they just can't use it as an excuse that they're tired. They're trying to catch up, because they put themselves in that position and they should be in it. I don't think they should be necessarily leading the Pacific Division, but they should be in a playoff spot right now, given the personnel that's on this team.
Well, I think as we get closer and closer to the playoffs, I think we're seeing a lot of mea culpas across the media, and I just assume everybody's always heard every conversation you and I've had. So it's sometimes when I bring stuff up that we talked about in the past, I feel like I'm being repetitive, but you and I had long conversations, did we not, about I'm not a fan of predictions. I'm not a fan of, having, picking who's going to make it and who's not going to make it. Every season has its own ebbs and flows. Having said that, my expectation was clearly that this team was a playoff team. But I've seen some people doing some mea culpas that had this team in the Stanley Cup final, and those types of things. This is not, and we've said this over and over and over again, this is not a team overachieving. This is a complete underperformance, but they have put themselves in such a situation that, a deflating loss. Having said that, they might even win tonight. It's just crazy enough to happen, right? We've seen that movie before. Pete,
if they do turn it around and win tonight, it'll be a lot of it because of the performance last night. They'll they feel guilty about that and come up with a stronger performance tonight. The only factor is I think tonight's game is their 4th game in 6 nights. And Winnipeg, was rested, didn't play last night, and Flames had the second in back-to-back with travel over there after the game last night. But, if they can rise to the occasion, I say they have a chance to knock off the Jets in tonight's game and then, get themselves back in it. But it's going to be a tough finish for them with the game in Vancouver on Saturday and then 2 home games next week on Monday and Wednesday, as the schedule indicates there, those closing games in the Saddle Dome. So, but tonight's game, if they don't win tonight's game, their chances are pretty much null and void. And they have to win it in regulation time. They can't afford to give Winnipeg any points tonight.
Right. Exactly. So, and exactly. Yeah. I was just going to say there's no scenario in which they now don't need help somewhere, because Winnipeg's got a game in hand on them. Right.
Yeah.
So they're going to need help, it goes right back to the original premise you had in all of this. Last night, tonight, doesn't matter. You put yourselves in this position, and now you have to live with the consequence of it. I want to ask you about Nazem Kadri, and I know what it sounds like. It sounds like I'm trying to give him cover. It is not my attempt to give him cover. Did not play well last night. Directly resulted in a couple goals and some giveaways. you've seen enough players that have come in that have been asked to elevate their role. And I know, but Rob, he won a Stanley Cup. Yep. And he was a huge part of that Colorado team. Yep. He was, but he wasn't the driver. That's Nathan McKinnon. That was, other players. He was a really good,
and others, yeah.
Right. Really good second line player. Did we find out this year how difficult it is to be a top line player in the NHL? That some guys, given the opportunities, still, and the comparison I would make, Pete, and I don't know, maybe this is completely unfair, but you'll remember when Rennie Bork was going to be the replacement for Jerome McGinley. He had 20 goals, and Rennie now, he could take some of that load. And I don't, I remember being in some of those scrums, and Rennie didn't like that. Like, that was a lot of pressure. Is Kadri kind of stuck in one of those situations that he's been asked to be a number one guy, but he can't be?
That's a very good point you bring up there, Rob. It's one that I hadn't really considered. But you're right. When he played with the Avalanche last year, he was very strong part of them winning the cup. But he was not the premier guy. There were other guys there that were leading the way for them. Right. Now, having said that, I thought over the first half of this season that Kadri was the Flames' best player, certainly the best forward.
Yeah,
and he went to the All-Star game as the lone Flame representative there. But it seems that ever since he's come back, he hasn't been the same player at all. And last night, I thought it reached an absolute low for him on this year. I mean, he caused some 2 goals with kind of lackluster play. And, mentally, you're right. He may be feeling the pressure of supposedly being a top player on this team and not really being, built to be the top player. He's built to be a contributor, a strong contributor, but he's not playing with any fight or any emotion out there, it seems. And of course, there was some talk that he and Daryl had a little bit of a friction there, and Daryl benched him one of the games. Now, in last night's game, despite the fact that he made the blunders on those two goals that the goals the Blackhawks got, he still played as much ice time as he's played in any game this year. Daryl just kept putting him back out there. So, it's real puzzling, the whole situation with him. But he seems to have lost interest, or maybe that is fatigue, having been in a leadership role that he wasn't quite, supposed to be in, that they're built to be in, I should say. But on top of that, he's one of the highest paid players on the team. This year. Now, next year, when the salaries of Uyghur goes in, he's not going to be, but he is this year. And so, you expect more out of him.
It's funny. Gavin just threw up his NHL stats, and you take out last year, which was a career year for him at 87 points. We'd be talking about potentially his best point production season with some games remaining. He's at 54. Could he get to 61 that he got with Toronto? It's not out of the realm of possibility. But last year, it reminds me so much of the David Moss question, Pete, in a different way. Are you a 20-goal scorer, or did you score 20 goals?
Yeah. Yes. Valid point. Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
So
there you go. Yeah.
You and Mike Vernon might take a little umbrage with this because you both saw it, and we know the run, the kind of the sometimes the fans got on Mike. Last night after that 4th goal, big Bronx cheer the next time Markstrom played the puck. He got pulled in the game against Anaheim. Daryl Sutter backed him, said, I'm going to go with my ace. You need a goalie to steal you a game. I don't think he cost them the game last night, Pete. But he wasn't great. He was just good. He was an NHL caliber goalie. He wasn't the savior that they needed at the most important time.
Yes, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right with that. He wasn't, he had some lackadaisical play in front of him that led to those goals. But, the great goaltenders make the saves to make up for the blunders that were made by teammates in front of him. And he didn't do that last night. He came up with a number of great saves, but, he didn't make those saves on those particular plays that we're talking about. And he did get the booze out. But having said that, he doesn't get the booze that often when you compare him to what Mike Vernon went through at times in his career here. Like, I remember Mike telling me at one time, my parents can't come to the games anymore because the fans are picking on them because I'm not having a great night. Yet Mike Vernon's one of the greatest goaltenders the Flames ever had. In fact, he's the only goalie that being the guy in the nets in 1989. Then he went on to win another Stanley Cup in Detroit. And I know when he came back here, like he was brought back by the Flames back in, what was it, 99 or 2000, somewhere in that range. And he came back and personally, if I'd have been running the team, I wouldn't have brought him back, because I know that he was treated not very well by the fans in his hometown. Like he's a Calgary native. He was a goaltender on the premier hockey team in his city, and yet, you know, if he had a bad night, they were very quick to boo him and yell all kinds of insults at him and his family. So, but he did come back, and he played another season or so here with the Flames. But you know, Markstrom is not even close to being attacked like Vernon was when he was the Flame goaltender. Maybe Markstrom should sit down with Vernon at some point and have a little bit of a conversation, and he can teach him to block some of that out if it's being a factor with how he performs in the games. But as I say, he's not getting booed nearly as much as Vernon got booed here, and Vernon won most of his games here, so a lot more than he lost, that's for sure.
Not much to talk about on the other side. I thought Peter Mrazek was good, but I don't think he came in and stole this game. No, that wasn't the headline today, but it was a little bit bittersweet watching 19 for Chicago, Jonathan Toews, Pete. I don't know. I just feel like that was maybe the last time we're going to see him in the Dome. And if it is, what an incredible career.
Yes, indeed so, Rob. But, you know, he's not the player now that he was in his prime and helping and leading the Blackhawks to their Stanley Cup championships. But he is indeed, you know, he's indeed a great, great character. And, you know, he's been through a lot with the illness, the continuation of COVID that's plagued him. You know, he missed a whole season in there. And then this year he's missed some time up until recently. But I think a real interesting note in last night's game was in the warm-up when he was tossing pucks into the crowd to spectators that were near the bench of the Blackhawks, and that to me gave me a little bit of an indication that, you know, this is going to be his final hurrah in a game here in the Saddle Dome, which will be too bad. He's an older player now, but I think if he hadn't had those health issues, he could probably continue on and you know, play a couple of more years in the league. But it seems to me like this is going to be his final hurrah in the Saddle Dome, and soon it'll be his final hurrah in the NHL as a player. But certainly he has Hall of Fame credentials, and his performances in prime time are not going to be forgotten. And this is a guy, you know, I've had the opportunity, and I think you have too, Rob, interview him on a number of occasions. He's always been very forthcoming and very easy to talk to, and from the distance, a very valuable leader that the Blackhawks have had for so many years.
Pete, I know there's Stanley Cups in there. There's international with Hockey Canada and Team Canada. But I want to pose this to you. Is his greatest achievement alongside Patrick Kane resurrecting that franchise? Because I think people have a little bit, or maybe have forgotten, and you can speak to this better than anybody, some of those Sunday afternoon games, you know, back around 2005, 2006, before he and Kane got there, like it was a terrible run organization. It was just, and then almost overnight, those two guys turned it into a powerhouse.
Well, those two guys were very, very definitely the two players that turned it around on the ice for the Blackhawks after those dismal years they had. But some would say it was Bill Wirtz, who was the former owner of the team, passing on the ownership to his son. And then they started spending more money to bring in top-notch players to go with those two guys and some others that they had. So to me, the fans in Chicago were starting to get a little bit upset with the Blackhawks having such poor performances, even though they were still selling out all of their games through those tough times that we were talking about. But then once they got those two guys going and then backed them up with some very solid players as well, spent some money on players, they became a real powerhouse in the NHL. And unfortunately now they're going through a rebuild situation, which, you know, most teams that have success on a long run, as the Blackhawks did, are going to run into that sort of situation in rebuilding time. So it's too bad that Kane has now moved on to play with the Rangers, is no longer there with the Blackhawks. Toews is the last guy from that group, at least the leadership group of the Blackhawks, and it's unfortunate that his career ends with the team that's going to finish near the bottom of the NHL standing. But that's the way things work. But yeah, it definitely turned that franchise around and made them a more competitive team and satisfying the fans in Chicago.
You're right. I think we need to tip our hats as well to Seabrook and to and to Keith as well. I mean, there was a great leadership group, and as you take a look there, I mean, they're just for so long they were just so bad, and then. But the other thing that they did, Pete, and you can speak to this better than I can, but Chicago likes a winner, and they were able to cut through, and Toews and Kane were just as big a deal. I mean, the Cubs that's a Cubbies town. That's a Bears town. It's to a lesser extent, it's a Bulls town, to a lesser extent, a White Sox town. But, Kane and Toews cut through that. They were able to give the Blackhawks a very big profile in that city too.
They definitely did. No question about that. I mean, up until that time, anytime you'd go to Chicago, the big appeal was to the basketball team, the Bulls, who are winning championships in the NBA and Michael Jordan and all of that situation in there. But those two guys came in and brought this team up to the same level, if not above the level of the basketball team once they got them firm footing into the ground. And of course, eventually the basketball team had faded a bit. But yeah, I mean, if they hadn't brought in Toews and Kane and Keith and Seabrook and a few other players, they'd have stayed in the doldrums of the league and would be, maybe the third or fourth rated team with regard to the city of Chicago. But he certainly brought in much more excitement for their fans and winning ways, and allowed them to become more prominent in the city and more prominent like they were back in the days when they had Stan Mikita and Bobby Hull and Pierre Pilote and Glenn Hall and all that gang, when they won a Stanley Cup, but were finishing in first place in the regular season a number of times during that spread, when the Blackhawks then were right up there. They may have been the premier team in Chicago after the Cubs at that particular point in time, but that fell off. But then they got it brought back again with those two guys in particular leading the way.
Well, here's a nice, nifty little transition. Former captain of the Blackhawks will become the guy who coaches the Flames the most tonight, right? Does Daryl Sutter not pass Badger Bob Johnson?
He's going to pass him tonight, and this will be his 401st regular season game as head coach of the Flames. And Badger Bob coached 400 games regular season with the Flames. And it's a real interesting note, Rob. I was pointing it out the other day when it was with some Flame fans, is that Badger Bob coached the Flames for 5 years, consecutive years. And then you had Bob Hartley coach the Flames for 4 consecutive years. Beyond that, the time this team has been in Calgary, they've had no coach this team longer than 3 years in succession. Now, Daryl is a situation in that the first time he came in, it was roughly the middle of the 02-03 season, and he went on to coach the team for 2.5 years. And then he came back here to the Flames a couple of years ago in midseason again, roughly. And this is his second full season. So he's been as the coach as long as Badger Bob has with regard to the games, but not in succession. And so, it's really interesting to see how short terms the Flames coaches have had when you look back at the history of the team. And, Badger Bob, I could talk all day about stories with Badger Bob and the time when he was coach of the Flames. I mean, there was never, I've never met a coach that was more upbeat than Badger Bob. I mean, he'd come in every day. He'd come in, it's a great day for hockey. And I think there was only one time that I saw him have a down moment. And that was one time after a game. I believe it was in the Saddle. It was in the Saddle Dome. It was against Edmonton. I think the final score was 9-1 for Edmonton. Losing like that in your own building. And after the game, when he was meeting with the media, he had a down moment there for about 30 seconds. And all of a sudden he snapped out of it, but we'll come back. We got a great goal there near the end from Poplitsky, and we'll go on. We're going to win some more games. And that that was Bob, and it was every day he was an upbeat beat guy. And you go back to he was the most superstitious guy I've ever been around in my life. And just to give you some examples of that, like we do a coach's show with him every day. Most of the time we do a recording of it in the morning after the morning skate, and then we'd run it on the air prior to the game. And Bob had a superstition that if we won, the Flames won the game prior to this one that we were doing, we had to go back to the same location to do the show and do the interview. And the most popular place, and maybe Daryl should go there for some of his segments, is to the boiler room of the Saddle Dome. We went there more often than not and had long winning streaks doing the show out of there. A couple of real interesting ones. Another time the team had a winning streak where Bob would sit on a Zamboni and I'd be standing next to him and interviewing him in that kind of situation. He'd even do that if it was a road game, and he'd have to go over and kind of talk to the guy who drove the Zamboni, say in Chicago or wherever, and convince him that he could sit on the Zamboni for 5 minutes to do the coach's show. So he was pretty amazing. And then there was another time that we didn't get to do it in the morning, and we did it about 2 hours before the start of the game. At that time, we were doing the coach's show in the penalty box. And so we're in Vancouver for a game in the old building there in Vancouver. Yeah. So about 2 hours, maybe an hour and a half before the game, we're walking across the ice from where the dressing rooms are to the penalty box. We get there, the penalty box gate is locked. So Badger Bob gets up on the rail and climbs over the glass and into the penalty box to open the gate so I could get in, and we did the interview there. Then we get out after that 5 minutes was done and walk back across the ice. So I'm looking around the building, and I stood thinking to myself, well, at least nobody saw us here. So they won't be bringing up this crazy situation here. And then I get up into the broadcast booth, and Jim Robson, the longtime broadcaster for the Canucks, was up there. He says to me, what was Johnson doing climbing over the glass to get into the penalty box a while ago? So it was pretty intriguing being around Badger Bob. It was just another time we used to do it. We have to go up to the row of the game the Flames were trying to win. So this didn't last long, fortunately. We were in the auditorium in Buffalo. Pardon me?
You weren't up to row 50 yet.
Yeah. So we're there, and so this time the Flames were going for their 38th win of the year. And so we had to walk up 38 steps to this row to sit down and do the show. So we did the thing, and then I said to Bob after, I don't wish any bad will for the Flames, but I hope this winning streak ends soon. And but that was Bob. He was such a character.
Oh my
gosh. And he didn't win the Stanley Cup here, but he helped build the team that did win the Stanley Cup in 1989 with his patience when he was around young players. I mean, he was a great teacher, an innovator. I mean, one of the things that he innovated, you see it now sometimes when a team gets a bench penalty for having too many players on the ice, they'll send one of their top players to the penalty box to serve that 2 minutes. Back in those days, you would send perhaps your least ice time player over for that penalty. But sure. Bob, he would have Lanny McDonald go and serve that 2 minute penalty. And the reason was he might be coming out of the penalty box just as the puck comes up into his area where the player steps out of the box, gets the puck, got a breakaway or a great scoring chance. And at first, Lanny didn't quite understand that. He was looking at it as being, dejecting him a little bit and bringing him down. But he eventually realized what the whole situation was about and scored a couple of goals that way coming out of the penalty box. So those were all those that did much more innovation that Bob had. He was an outstanding guy. He didn't win a cup here, but he did win the cup in Pittsburgh in 1991. And, he won as coach of the Penguins. Mario Lemieux, of course, was the star player then. And it was after that he ended up that he had a brain aneurysm that was brain cancer. And he ultimately passed away way too soon as a result of that. And I'll remember that September of 1991, after the Penguins had won the Stanley Cup, Flames had an exhibition game in Colorado Springs. And that's where Bob was when he was with this illness that he had. And he was at the game. And before the game, he was in a little room down near where the dressing rooms are. And I had the opportunity to go in and see him at that point. He couldn't talk, but he was as sharp as ever. He'd write things. He'd write things down on his notepad, his famous notepad that he always had behind the bench. He had that with him. He'd write things down and show you what he, what he was thinking and that sort of thing. It was really sad to see him in that type of situation, but nonetheless, he was trying to make the most of it. And I understand as the season started that year for the Penguins, even though Scotty Bowman had taken over as coach of the team, Bob would still be sending messages to Scotty, even from his sick bed and that sort of thing. So, yeah, just he's a total different from Daryl.
Yeah, a little, yeah,
and,
just slightly.
And you do the coaches show with Bob, and you'd ask him one question, then I could run for coffee because he'd go on and talk for 5 minutes, and you can come back and ask the second question. Of course, we all know Daryl at some of his media, almost all of his media conferences, the answers are extremely short. So, but it's a great deal for Daryl to match Bob's record last night, and tonight we'll pass him as the all-time winningest coach in Flame history. Now, another notable Badger Bob, he's the only Calgary Flame coach to beat the Oilers in the playoffs, doing that as the coach in 1986 in that overwhelming upset in Edmonton when they won game number 7.
All right. Because part of the job of this program is to highlight Calgary, and we want to keep some of the stories alive, I do want to ask you about 3 different Badger Bob stories. You mentioned 86, which featured a 10 or 11 game losing streak, right?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Can you tell this story about Bob bringing in Eric Dahachuk and George Shaky Johnson? You know the one about he brought him in and wanted to know about why they were writing about this so-called losing streak. I think it was 9 games into it or something like that. Talks about your positivity, right?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. I'm just trying to get how he put that. Yes, he had George and Eric come into his office and talk about that. And I think it was, you say it was 9 games that turned out to be 11 games. Yep. And he said he was talking about the fact that you're making too much of a point of this. This is not really a losing streak. It's just a little dip.
Which was Bob, right? Which was Bob.
That's Bob. Yep.
True or false, Pete, that you mentioned it being an innovator. Did Bob dress up special goalies for a practice one time?
Yes, he did. This was a real interesting one. That was in '86 when Grant Fuhr, of course, was the goaltender for the Oilers, and of course he's left-handed goaltender. Not too many of them around, and I think it was the goalie from one of the goalies from the University of Calgary team that Bob had come in one day on an off day and put him in the nets, so that the Flames, when they were out in practice, were shooting at a left-handed goaltender as opposed to the right-handers. The Flames had 2 goaltenders at that time, and both of them were right-handers, including Mike Vernon. And yes, he did do that. He brought them in, and then another time he had all of the players go way up into the second level of the Saddle Dome seating area before a practice, and he had his assistant coaches and a couple other people out on the ice making plays like the Oilers make them. He had, like, Pierre Pagé was an assistant coach, and he had him playing like he's Wayne Gretzky. Now he wasn't close to Wayne Gretzky, but he had showing some of his mannerisms of how he passed the puck and who he passed the puck to, so that the players could get a bird's eye view of that from watching from way up on top of that second level of the Saddle Dome. So that was another innovative thing. I remember that day, all the media guys were there, and we were looking. Has Bob really lost it, having those players all the way up there and these assistant coaches making like they're Mark Messier and Wayne Gretzky and Paul Coffey, etc.? So, but that was his plan, and it worked. He was just absolutely incredible. Some of the things he'd come up with.
Did he actually dress up goalies in Oiler jerseys to build his team's confidence?
Yes, he did. Yeah. That goalie that came in who was wearing an Oiler jersey.
That goalie was wearing the Oiler jersey.
Pardon me?
He was wearing.
I don't think so. I don't remember that happening.
Didn't he? Did he bring in goalies in Oiler jerseys, or is that an old wives' tale?
What's that? What again, Rob?
Sorry, did he dress up some goalies, like not his goalies, but other goalies, and brought them in Oiler jerseys, or is that just an old legend?
No, he had one guy that came in. He put an Oiler jersey on him.
Okay.
Yes, he did. He did do that. I forget who the guy was. It might have been the same guy, the university guy. But yeah, he did do that as well to give the Flames confidence. They were scoring all kinds of goals against them, so gave them confidence they could score against Grant Fuhr. So yeah, he did.
And I
don't do that.
I don't know why this particular one sticks out of my head, and I apologize because it's kind of like a magic trick. We have never met before, folks, so I'm throwing these out at Pete. But the famous game in New Jersey where it got snowed and delayed, and you had to buy time, was one of your guests not Badger Bob's wife?
Yes, it was. That was the famous snowstorm game, and I'm just trying to think here. It might have been the anniversary of that game might be tonight, because it was definitely in this time of year. Oh no, it would have been that. It was earlier than this. But anyway, yeah, it was real interesting. Like the Flames went to the arena there in New Jersey, in the Meadowlands, and had their morning skate. We went back to the hotel, and it was starting to snow. And I remember in my room, I was getting some notes prepared for the game, and I get a phone call from Al Coates. Yeah. Al at that time was involved in with the Flames and media relations or management, I forget, which he later went on to be the general manager of the team. Anyway, he called, said, "We're leaving a little bit earlier today from our planned time to go to the rink because of the snowstorm. We want to make sure we get there." So fine, we go down, and so we get there, and the time it took for the bus to take the team from the hotel to the arena was the normal time. They were able to get somehow around the snow and all that type of thing and get in. So we're in there really early, and none of the Jersey guys were there. And so time was going on, and the team ultimately went out on the ice 3 times for warm-ups. And Bob, the whole time that this was going on, Bob was standing out in the hall and counting the New Jersey players as they came in, because apparently the league rule was once you had 14 players, you had to start the game. And Bob was counting them all off. And at one point he had 14 players, and he went to the referee's room and he said, "They've got 14 players here, so let's get the game started." Anyway, they didn't start then. They had to wait for their 2 best players were the last players to get there. They were caught up in the snowstorm and eventually did get there. And that's when, then the game got started. But yeah, you're right. It was during the time that we were waiting to get the game. We were on the air. And of course, we were a distance from where, things were happening. We didn't know how many players come in and what was going on there. We just see Flames going on the ice and going off the ice and on the ice and off. And anyway, Badger Bob, his wife, was with the team on that trip, as she did from time to time. And she would carry Bob Johnson's luggage into the hotels, too. That was another thing. The bus would arrive at a hotel. Bob's wife would get out, grab his suitcase and hers, and take him into the hotel.
I don't think Wendy's doing that for Daryl.
Yeah. Yeah, that would be interesting to see. But anyway, so we get her. We're trying to fill time, obviously, and there weren't many people in the building. And eventually she came on the air with us, and we're doing the interview, and there was an announcement on the public address system. So we stopped, because that's where we were getting information as to when the game might start. And so the PA announcer came up and said, the game will be starting in a little while, but for all you fans that were able to make it in here, there were 486 fans there. Please go up to such and such a gate and go to the counter there. We have a special gift for you. And at that point, Bob's wife got up and she said, "I got to go get one of those gifts." So away she goes and leaves us high and dry. Doug Barkley and I, Doug, the color commentator, high and dry in the middle of our interview that we had with her. And away she went. She had to make sure she got one of those gifts. And I understand she ended up getting 5 of them. And she'd come on a lot of the road trips. I mean, he and Bob would sit right in the front seat of the bus and the airplane and all that sort of thing. So not all the trips, but she was on a lot of them, no question about that. So that was the only time I ever saw a coach's wife go on a trip as many times as she did. The odd time would be one game or something, but she was there on a lot of the Flame trips over that 5 years in which he was coach of the Flames.
I love that. I love that. Before I let you go, this is a very special week, 35th anniversary of something that's still a record to this day, isn't it?
Yep, still a record today. It was on April the 3rd of 1988, which was 35 years ago, which was April the 3rd. This year was on Monday. And that was the day that Hakan Loob scored his 50th goal, and doing it, of course, as a member of the Flames, doing it in the Saddle Dome. And he became the first Swedish player to score 50, and nobody else from Sweden has scored 50 goals since. Wow. So, of all the great Swedish players that have played in the NHL, then nobody else has been able to reach that 50-goal standard in one season that Hakan did in the 1987-88 year. He and Joe Nieuwendyk were the two Flame players that had 50 goals that year. Joe, this game that he got his 50th in for Hakan was the final game of the regular season. It was a Sunday afternoon game in the Saddle Dome against the Minnesota North Stars. And it was a power play in the third period when Hakan scored, and that gave the Flames a 4-1 victory. And that's when I yelled out another, not a saying that's become very used very frequently by me, but when he scored his 50, I said, "That's number 50 for Looby Dooby Doo." And so that got a little bit of traction at that time.
Now okay. I have known you for 2 decades. I did not know that. I thought you were about to tell me that this was part of the Yeah Baby string, but that wasn't.
No, it didn't get a Yeah Baby. He got a Looby Dooby Doo.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. I love it. I learned something new here today. This is fantastic. Pete, just a thought on Hakan, because one of the things, and we got to know him a little bit. He was a big listener to the games, or is a big listener to the games online. He's a general manager over in Europe and Sweden, but we also saw him at the Heritage Classic. The 80s, sometimes there was standoffish Europeans or what. Hakan Loob was part of the fabric of this team, right? Like his teammates loved him, didn't they?
Oh yeah, he was adored by his teammates. He was a fun-loving guy and a very serious player. And he was just awesome that he came over here. And he had that 50-goal season in 87-88. Then was a big part of the team winning the Stanley Cup the next year in 1989. And what was interesting is that he decided then that he was not going to play anymore. And he was still young at that point. I think he was 29 or 30 years of age, and decided then that he was going to retire as an NHL player, stop playing in the NHL, go over and play hockey again in Sweden, because he wanted to be. His kids were getting to a point where they were going to school, and he wanted to have them going to school in Sweden as opposed to going to school in Canada, because of the fact that Swedish was their number one language. And I remember he came back here, back for the Flames Stanley Cup reunion that they had about 10 years ago now, I guess it was. And I was talking to him then, and he said, I made a mistake by leaving here too soon. He said, I should have stayed a few more years, had the kids go to school here for a few more years before I left the NHL or left the Flames. So if he'd have stayed, there might have been another Stanley Cup. But he was greatly, greatly adored by his teammates. Jim Poplinski, and we joke with him all the time, and Lanny McDonald and all that gang. And he just fit right in with them. And when it came time to play hockey, very, very serious player, as displayed by all the goals that he scored, particularly in that 87-88 campaign.
Actually, I lied to you. I got one more for you, Pete. And that was this past Sunday. Cami Kepke kind of wrapped up the last of the Global Sportscast as part of their news package. And I'm kind of past the yelling and screaming that we know the world's changing and all those sort of things. But can you just speak to the legacy of 2 and 7 and Sports at 11, and I mean Eddie Whalen and Grant Pollock and Mike Lonsborough and Mike Toth and Joe Sports and Brendan Park. I mean, it was really part of the fabric for almost 40, 50 years here in this city, right?
Yes, no question. And all those guys you mentioned were very, very solid sportscasters, but they also were very good at entertaining when they were on the air. That Sports at 11, that Grant Pollock and Mike Lounsbrough and Ed Whalen was not a part of that too much, because he was on earlier in the evening. But those guys would, they would put on quite a show. There's no question about it. I mean, and they would cover not only, their primary would be covering the Flames, of course, and the Stampeders and the professional teams, but they also got to the grassroots level as well. They'd be in there talking about the university teams or the midget league, the AAA, and the Bantam League and that sort of thing, and have guests on there that the Sports at 11. I mean, that show ran for an hour, I think, and they'd have all kinds of guests there. They had their camera out on the ice or out on the field or out where these teams were, and would have little clips of what they were doing there, and they'd have interviews. And I mean, it was very, very entertaining and very, very much a sports feeling at that particular point in time. Then, of course, that got reduced. I think that went on for about 11 years, and then that show ended, and they started, they were on, it was getting shorter and shorter the time they had for sports on that station and other stations here in Calgary. And then, of course, when sports TV came in, with TSN first and then Sportnet, the sports casts on the local stations like Global and CTV and that type of thing, they got to be, reduced, and to a point now, as you mentioned, Global now not having that sports on there. So I think it's very, very sad for the business, and also, for the fans, that they don't get an inside look at that. But this was the plan that's been being made by superiors, and it's unfortunate. And I hopefully not too many people in the future are going to be affected by that. But there's definitely a change in the scope of broadcasting sports in this city, and probably all the cities in Canada for that matter.
Well, this was amazing. First of all, because of the Looby Dooby Doo. That I won't lie to you. And I would suspect, I know you're not a big social media guy, but that's going to probably run hard on social media for the next couple of days. I would suggest that'll be a clip that you're going to hear quite a bit.
I had somebody mention that the other day to me. It was a couple of weeks ago. I was somewhere and somebody said, "Do you remember the time you said Looby Dooby Doo on the air?" And I had kind of forgotten about it until
honestly, I didn't know the story till today. I thought you were going to bust out a "Yeah, baby." That's what I thought it was going to be.
Yeah, no, "Yeah, baby" started 2 years before that, in 1986. The first time I yelled that was after Game 7 in Edmonton, when the Flames beat the Oilers in that playoff series, and that became something that the fans wanted to hear more and more often. And I used to have to tell them sometimes, I'm only doing it for important events.
Exactly. And I was there for the lone triple "Yeah, baby."
Yeah,
I was there for the lone triple "Yeah, baby," which to this day remains the greatest single call in the history of broadcasting. Don't at me. Don't argue with me. I just informed you of that fact.
Good. Well, I don't know about that, but anyhow, I'll take it.
I didn't ask you, did I? I didn't ask you, Pete. I'm telling you. All right, my friend. We'll catch up in a couple weeks. Who knows what happens tonight in Winnipeg? We'll watch with great interest, but you'll stick around for the playoff run, regardless of who's in it, right? We can talk hockey with you for the spring.
Yeah, we're definitely able to do that, Rob. So look forward to the next one.
All right, buddy. You're the best.
I'm going to care, man.
All right, buddy.